What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Dead Noise. I'm Chris, and with me today, thanks to the power of Zoom, is Miss Lynne Lugosi-Sparks. How are you doing today, ma'am?
I'm well. Thank you for having me, Chris.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know
Mhm.
people that follow me and people that are familiar with the stuff that I talk about is probably sick of me talking about this specific movie, but it this year and the day that this interview airs is the
Mhm.
95th anniversary of Universal's Dracula from 1931, in which your grandfather, Bela Lugosi, starred in the title role.
Yes.
One of the most impactful, influential films of all time, not just horror films, in my opinion. But
Mm.
as you can see behind me, I'm a little bit biased.
Right.
So I do want to start with asking you, I know in other interviews you've talked about your first recognition of the fame of your grandfather being
Mhm.
him being on the cover of a Crest Hill book series, I
Y-
believe.
Yes.
What can you tell me about the first time you saw the movie Dracula? Like, do you have any memories from that first time, or were you too young to remember?
I have just a vague recollection of watching it, like laying on our living room floor, watching it on TV. And to tell you the truth, I'm not even sure I got through the whole thing because, it was like, oh, that's him. That's the movie that, we've been talking about, or I've seen pictures around the house about. So that was pretty young. That would have been, middle elementary school.
Yeah, I think I was around the same the same age range when I saw it.
Mhm.
My my recollection, it's kind of all over the place for me because as a child growing up in the early 2000s, Dracula and the character and your grandfather's interpretation specifically had already been done so many times and it was all
Yeah.
over the media in different
Hmm.
iterations.
Yeah.
So by the time I finally saw the movie, I'm like, oh, it all makes sense now. That's the
Yeah.
original.
Right.
I had originally had seen Nosferatu, and that was like
Hmm.
the very first classic horror film I ever watched. And
Hmm.
then I'm like, okay, this is very out there. Like
Right.
it's the first silent film I ever saw.
Yeah.
And then AMC's Fear Fest had Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and I only saw like a brief clip of it before I
Mhm.
had to go to church or something. I don't even
Yeah.
remember. And I was like, that looks, and it was when I saw that name in the credits, I'm like, wait, I remember that name because it was in a book about Dracula that I saw.
Right.
And I begged like my parents, my grandparents, like, I need to see the original Dracula.
Right.
And
Right.
the Legacy Collection DVD was a
Hmm.
birthday gift, and I wore that out so much.
Really. That was a nice set.
It really was. I'm
Yeah.
glad that they re-released it for like Blu-ray and just an updated DVD, not
Yeah.
maybe a decade ago. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But
Very beautiful restoration.
fantastic documentaries too.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of what I learned about the production and the movie came from the bonus features.
Uh-huh.
But it wasn't until I was older that I really came to appreciate the technical aspects of it.
Hmm.
With it being the first sound horror film, and also the whole story of Bela getting the role, especially you've said in interviews, he had to basically fight for that role, which is
Yes.
crazy to think now, so many years
Right.
later.
I know.
But what can you say about your research and your family history of like overhearing that story of him getting the role?
Well, just from the research that uh, I have done, mostly the research that the author of the biography that our family is putting out has done. It does trace that time period briefly from when he was obviously had found great success on the stage, Broadway stage, and brought then that portrayal to the West Coast tour of Dracula, and had become, quite famous for that role. So when Universal was looking for their lead in Dracula, he was quite, I think, taken aback that he wasn't considered. And he wasn't considered for a long time. They went through a whole other list of actors. Of course, their first choice would have been Lon Chaney Sr.,
Hmm.
but he passed away. So, whether Universal, um, used the search as a kind of a marketing tool to promote Dracula because they were really putting a lot of trust that this movie would save their studio, which was failing at that time.
Hmm.
And so I think they were very cautious about putting a lead in who really didn't have a lot of other famous or more major leading roles in films at that time. But I think Universal finally sent a contingent of people up to see the play in Oakland, California, and then soon after, invited him down for an interview and an audition. But they still, even after that, they took a long time before announcing it. So I think it was more of creating the anticipation of who would it be and would it be Béla Lugosi?
That marketing definitely would have worked on me.
Yeah,
I probably would have been campaigning for him
yeah,
if I got the sense that there was any sort of hesitation. They were
right,
genuinely still looking for somebody. I would be
right.
like, he's right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Bela was so, I think, I'm not an expert on when these things happened exactly, but he was getting frustrated that a film wasn't being made, and to the point where he even was trying to find studios that would, produce the film with him in the lead role, and had, agents and publishers, looking out, for a way to get the script and rights to the film. So,
I forgot that he almost went that option with it, like trying to just self fund it, just do it
mhm,
himself.
yeah.
In listening to a lot of your interviews, that was probably one of the things that really stuck out the most to me, along with just, and you told me this over the phone before this interview. It was just a role that you always felt like he was destined to play. And
Yes,
even going as far back at looking at his Hungarian films, and there's a surviving couple frames of him
yes,
going through a window, and
yes,
that's so much like Dracula, but it was like
yes.
15 years before that. Um,
Yeah, I think even longer than that. I think that would have been like 1916,
oh,
I
yeah,
think. Yeah, 1918, maybe.
something like, I'm not the best
Mhm.
at math,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, so you've had a chance to see that clip.
mhm,
Yeah.
it's
And just his eyes and his mannerisms, his hands, everything about that little clip that we saw from early on in his film career, you know, you could tell that he was created to play that menacing role.
absolutely. And I don't think enough emphasis gets placed on the performance of his hands because everybody
Hmm.
talks about his eyes, but
Right.
in those close-up shots of him like coming out of the coffin, that is so perfectly done. And
Yeah.
I know Max Schreck's performances, Count Orlok in Nosferatu and Bela Lugosi in Dracula, they're always compared and they're like side by side. And a lot
Hmm.
of people talk about Max Schreck's hands because of those
You're
big
right.
nails.
Yeah.
But Bela didn't need those.
Right. Right. In fact, there's a still from Dracula, which the original are, he's kind of holding his hands up above the bed,
Hmm.
no nails, but then at some point over time, nails were added. So a lot of times when people want to use that picture, they want that one with nails. But I always say that he didn't have nails like that in the film. So
And he didn't have fangs either,
right,
which
yeah,
is, I remember like looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, because you grow up with all these like vivid memories and you kind of
right,
just make some up in your head.
yeah,
Like with slasher films being bloodier than they actually are, Dracula
yeah,
having fangs when he really didn't.
right,
And it's
right,
really interesting how that can just get conjured up in your memories when it didn't really happen.
right. Well, I think for people like look that imagery of the fangs and the blood, the Hammer films and Christopher Lee, it was so
Yeah.
prevalent and exaggerated that the two kind of overlapped at some point for people to think, of course, Bela had fangs, or There should have been blood. But when you're mentioning the hands, I'm in full kind of grandma mode right now. I have two grandsons, three and one. But the 3-year-old, we have a bronze bust of Béla Lugosi as Dracula that an artist named Henry Alvarez created years and years
Oh,
ago, and it's just a beautiful piece. But his bust with his hand out, and my little grandson was scared of it at first. And then so we talked about it. And now, even at 3, he understands that's a relative. But when he was little, he was 2, we'd say, do the Dracula hand. And he would stop and he'd do this real serious face and he'd put his little hand out. So even this little guy, sees that statue and associates that hand with Dracula.
that's so great. I love that story. I know a lot of people, when they think of Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, they talk
Uh-huh.
about the hands then because it was kind of almost became a joke in the film with the hands and
Right,
everything.
right.
But it's very prevalent in the
Mm-hmm.
original 1931 film. There's so many technical aspects to it that
Mm-hmm.
you when you see it in different formats you kind of pick up on because I'm sure you've done this where if there's a screening of it in the theater with
Mm-hmm.
it being on a bigger screen you kind of just see things in the background that you might have not
Mm-hmm.
seen on TV.
Right.
Like I'm sure you've heard about the lampshade with the
Yes.
it took me until seeing that in the theater at the age of 21 to finally
To
see
see
that
it.
that was there. Do you have a favorite moment of the film? Because I know it gets quoted a lot and there's a lot of iconic lines from it. Are
Right.
there any scenes from the film that stick out to you?
A couple, of course, you can't deny that the opening scene with him coming down the stairway and I bid you welcome. That I mean, that line has is a part of our pop culture. Just like like Toto. Where and I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure I got that right, but that line. So you have to say that has to be a favorite, and of course the Children of the Night. What music they make, but I really do. Uh, I guess it hit home to me as far as the the character of Dracula that he was trying to play when he enters the opera booth and he tells them there are far worse things than death.
Yep.
And to me, that was the really the one of the only times in the movie where Bela portraying that character, you feel kind of sorry for the character. Like,
Yeah.
he's going to live forever in this world of evil. And so, you get a little bit of feel a little bit of sympathy from him at that point.
Yeah, that was gonna be my answer too. Like of all the
Oh,
lines in the film, there are far worse things awaiting man than death.
yeah.
That's my favorite line in the whole
Okay.
film. I don't have any tattoos,
Uh-huh.
but I've always thought about like if I was to get a tattoo, I would get like a something relevant to the Universal films, especially with Dracula at the
Yeah.
forefront with that
Uh-huh.
quote, because
Oh,
it's just
nice.
that impactful to me.
That's
Um,
so interesting. I have talked about that a little bit, but I'm really happy to talk with you about that.
I think in this DVD set
Mhm.
in like the bottom of it, they actually have that, yeah, they have that quote across the bottom too.
Oh, yeah.
And before I had ever watched the movie, that was the first thing I saw and I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting quote." I didn't really know what it meant at the age of
Right.
10. But
But then
when
when it's delivered by Bela, it makes quite an impact.
absolutely. Um, one of if it's not going to be that, I would say that my favorite scene is that confrontation with Van Helsing, because you also have the history of Edward Van Sloan and Bela doing Broadway together, and
Right.
I don't know how many people know that, but
Yeah.
that history kind of it's almost palpable. Like you can tell that they had had a working history together because their
Right.
characters just gel so well.
Yes. Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think that helps with the performance and like
Mhm.
buying into the characters themselves because
Oh,
I always felt like Dracula and Van Helsing they had like had I don't know how to explain it, but like with all the quote unquote lives that Dracula's lived, he's come across a Van Helsing type of character.
Yes, right.
So when they first meet, you can see that familiarity, which
Um,
probably came from Broadway with the
yeah,
actors. But like
yeah,
in the deeper lore of the story,
uh,
it just works so
right.
well, in my opinion.
Interesting point. I agree.
Now, this is a 95-year-old film.
Yeah.
A lot of people, whether they know it or not, they have come across Dracula or more specifically Bela Lugosi's likeness
Yeah.
in one way or another. But they might have not even seen the movie,
Right.
but the impact and the overall legacy of Lugosi's interpretation
Hmm.
cannot be overstated.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
almost a full century later, as his granddaughter,
Hmm.
what can you say to his impact on cinema and just horror film, cinema as a whole, or just
Hmm.
American pop culture that you've seen from
Yeah.
your eyes?
Yeah. But I come, I answer that question completely from the perspective of being the granddaughter. And I'm kind of taking over the mantle from my dad on protecting his name and likeness. But, as a fan and as because I never met my grandfather,
Hmm.
and after, spending a lot of time doing research on his life and the person that he was, I am still overwhelmed every day at how much respect people have for him, not only for the role that he created and the icon he is as Dracula, but for all of his other films, which there was quite a few B films that he did, but people are, I mean, he it is a testament to his person and his craft that every film that he was in, he was almost always, I want to say always, the best part of the film.
Yeah.
But he did such a convincing job of portraying whatever character, whatever quality the film was, that people just remember him for, I think, for his magnetism. I mean, that his persona is still palpable, actually. When I don't know if that describes it well enough, but even to the point where young people, like you said, who a lot of people who haven't actually seen the whole movie or think, oh, it's old black and white, I don't want to see that. We have come to worldwide associate Bela Lugosi's face with Dracula, whether it's the Universal film or just as Dracula as the character. And so even children have heard the name or seen the face, and they won't have seen the film, but we'll be places and we'll have a Dracula Lugosi t-shirt on, and they'll walk by and say Dracula. They won't know exactly any about who he was or his history, but yeah, it's so 95 years later. I mean, you can't say this about very many films or about very many actors. There's just a handful who still hold the iconic status that he has.
Absolutely. And there have been so many vampire movies over the last
Yeah,
100 years,
yeah.
but just Dracula movies. There's been Christopher Lee, like you
Mm,
said. Gary Oldman had a fantastic
right.
performance, but just in my opinion and that of many millions of others,
Hmm.
nothing will touch that of Lugosi. And
Yeah.
I know he always kind of towards the end of his career, maybe he always said like Dracula is a blessing and a curse.
Hmm.
Dracula never dies because it led to him being
Right.
typecast to a certain degree.
Right.
And he might have been the first actor to really face that type of professional scrutiny of like
Yeah.
being typecast.
Hmm.
But Dracula never dies, and neither does Lugosi's legacy because of that, in my opinion.
Yes. I agree. I agree. He did tell my dad quite a few times that, and he wasn't really saying it to be bitter about the studios or about Hollywood, but I think just regret. He regretted and was filled with kind of with sorrow that he wasn't able to have more of a variety of roles. But he never took for granted um, how important his performance was, and that, he played it on stage and in appearances the rest of his life.
That's right. I saw a short interview with him from like 1951, I believe, and
Uh-huh.
he was getting ready to perform as Dracula on stage again, I believe. And even the interviewer was like, "Does Dracula ever end for you?" He's like, "No,
Oh,
not at all."
right. That interview he was on the ship coming home from England after doing the Dracula tour there.
That's
And
what
that
it
was the
was.
ship's reporter.
He said, which I found fascinating in that interview, that Dracula was the only film in history to be re-released in theaters year after year.
Right.
And look, there have been a lot of fantastic classic movies.
Yeah.
Dracula's obviously my favorite, but I know that's not the opinion of a lot of cinephiles, so to
Right.
speak. But to hear that
Right.
that was the case for at least 20, 25 years after the
Hmm.
release, that's amazing.
Right. Right.
With you growing up with Dracula and all of the horror films that your father was associated
Hmm.
with, because
Yeah.
he was Igor in Son of Frankenstein, he was the mastermind in White Zombie. I mean, the list really goes
Yeah.
on and on.
Yeah.
But were you yourself growing up, were you a horror film fan, so to speak?
Not really. I enjoyed watching my grandfather's films, mostly when they were on TV and then when they came onto DVD. But no, I really my first introduction to horror, other than, my grandfather's roles, was Friday the 13th, the
Oh,
film. And I went and saw that. To this day, I don't know why my mom and dad let me see that, because I, it really, I had never seen anything like that. The blood, the gore, the horrible violence. Um, I, so that really affected me. And I also put Jaws in the same category because my dad actually was a lifeguard, and we enjoyed go like it, not while I was growing up, but before he and my mom got married. And he was a swimmer, so why, we'd go to the ocean, we'd take nice vacations to Hawaii. After I saw Jaws, I can honestly tell you, I didn't go in the ocean for most of my life. I mean, I think just a few times after, as an adult, on a vacation or something. But that movie really, really did its job in terrifying me of the ocean.
you and me both.
Okay.
That was the first horror film I ever saw, and I was like 7, 8 maybe. And it terrified me. I didn't even go in like the kiddie pool in the backyard after that. And even as an adult, like I've seen it's one of my favorite movies because it's just so good. But
Yeah.
even to this day, when I see it in the theater every summer, like this past summer, we saw it with a live orchestra, my family and I,
Oh,
and I was like, "This is the coolest thing ever." I'm still not going to the beach.
right. Yeah, just that tiny little thought that something's coming up from underneath. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need that in my life.
Right. Right. But as far as other horror movies, I'm not like a slasher. I've never enjoyed those things. I like scary movies, or,
Mhm.
creepy movies. So, and as far as vampire films or Dracula films, when I watch them, I really don't compare unless there is an overtly, you know, scene to compare. Like if someone actually tried to copy a scene or a line, because I just think it's, to me, what made um, Bela's performance so amazing was how unique it was. So I
Yeah.
appreciate when other actors portray Dracula or a vampire in that way, in the way that they're acting it in the movie. So I appreciate all the different variations of it. But I think, like you said, no matter what movie you're watching, if it involves a vampire or Dracula, you can't help thinking about Bela a little bit.
Yeah, it's almost like a subconscious thing. Like you
Yeah,
don't want to think about it, but it's
right,
hard not
right,
to.
right.
Yeah, when I saw Renfield a couple
Yeah.
years ago, that was like the first thing that came to mind for obvious reason. I'm sure you've
Well,
seen the
those,
movie.
yeah, the scenes where they recreated.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was cool. Like I
Yeah.
didn't hate it, but at the same
Yeah.
time I was like, okay, it makes me want to watch the original Dracula,
Yeah. I know,
which
I am not I'm not a writer or in the entertainment business, but all of these remakes of those movies, from talking with fans and from watching the movies myself, there's a thread that ties these classic monster films together for people, and that is kind of the tragedy of the characters and
Mhm.
the characters themselves. And so instead of just remaking them in a more graphic or horrific or even comedic way, there is so much opportunity, I feel, to like that relationship between Renfield and Dracula. Like if they could have expanded it and portrayed it and fictionalized it in some way, because of course it's, you would have to do that. But
Mhm.
to make it like on more of a absolutely terrifying level of a vampire controlling you to make you do things, trying to fight against that or subconsciously knowing that that isn't what you want. I don't know. I just thought there could be some really like, you know, great scripts, great films around these characters and the tragedy of them. Then, did you ever see the series Penny Dreadful?
Yes, I did.
Like like those stories of the what we call the classic monsters, I thought they were so good because
Mhm.
they did that. They delved into the personality of these characters and their feelings.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's missing in, I don't want to say all, but definitely a lot of the modern, especially the remakes of the classics.
Hmm.
I will say the remake that they did of The Wolfman last year,
Hmm.
um, it really did hit that emotional mark for me anyway, more
Hmm.
so than the 2010 remake that they
Hmm.
did. That
Hmm.
one felt a little more action based.
Right.
The atmosphere of the last year's one, it was very atmospheric, very intimate, and very, at times, pretty frightening, just situationally.
Hmm.
And I,
Okay. You know what? I've been in this little cave in front of my computer working on this biography for so long that I have a list of films that I'd like to see, and I'll add that one to it because I had actually forgotten about that.
I don't know where exactly I want to go with this question because there's so many different avenues that it leads to. But after Bela Lugosi's death, at some point, your father, Bela Jr., was, I believe he was in law school at the time, and his professor had told him that Universal was making merchandise with Bela Lugosi's likeness, and that led to a years-long court
Yes.
battle with Lugosi versus Universal,
Right. Right.
and that in turn, that decision and how that went with the courts after so many years led
Yeah.
to Lugosi Enterprises, which you are the head of now, which
Mhm.
preserves Bela's likeness and licenses different products and stuff like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
There are obviously so many steps I'm missing to that story, but I'm gonna leave that to you to fill the gaps for the viewers.
Oh, you did a good job summing it up. I think the maybe an important thing to point out is, I'm really proud of my dad, first of all,
Yeah.
for his efforts, and he really did this great service to for all families of deceased celebrities to be able to protect the commercial use of their name and likeness. But in that saga, it was like a 16-year long court. Um, I don't want to call it a battle, but it was in the courts for 16 years. But the lower courts, uh, my dad won
Hmm.
against Universal, and they determined that Bela's interpretation of Dracula belonged to him. It was his face, he had created it on the stage. So when it went to the Supreme Court of California and they, uh, in essence, ruled against my dad, and they in their arguments and in their statements, they agreed that Bela owned his likeness and his portrayal as Dracula.
Hmm.
It was just that there wasn't a precedent in law for a deceased celebrity's name and likeness to be a property right. So that was the reason that they eventually lost, was because there was no precedent for that situation. So that's really, but what's important is that nobody disagreed that Bela did not own his likeness as Dracula. In fact, he licensed it to Universal
Mm,
for Dracula's daughter. And
that's
so,
right.
he did in his lifetime license his likeness, which is something that they didn't believe he did, but he did. um, but anyway, so once the California legislature enacted the law that made a deceased celebrity's rights a property right that could pass to their heirs, that really opened up the world of protection for families, to be able to license or not license at their discretion.
Yeah, and that I believe that led to because Lugosi was the first family to do that, but I know you were very close with the Cheneys and the Karloffs and everything. You guys do conventions together in
Yeah.
California. Eventually you guys came together. I believe this was a group effort to get the Universal Monsters on the USPS stamps in the 90s. Was that
Yeah.
a group decision with you guys?
It was. All the families did take part in that. There was
Okay.
people that, petitioned, and they had a certain amount of signatures. It was a big deal. Like in our house, our family household, I feel like that was a significant amount of time, like maybe years, that was being talked about. And then
Wow.
it was really fun because Universal did a great job of doing like I call it a premiere, but it was when they introduced the stamps,
Hmm.
and they did a presentation, and it was really fun. And all the families came, so the extended Karloff's family, extended Cheney families, this extended Lugosi families all came to this celebration of the stamp. It was really a big deal.
Now, wasn't Bela a stamp collector himself, or was that a myth?
No, he really was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In fact, I think everything my grandfather did, he wanted to be perfect at,
Mm,
and I guess, we would call him a completist at this, now, as far as a collector.
I like that.
Um, but he also just for sure thought that this was a good investment. And so, and it would drive my grandmother crazy because they would go and they would do, a performance or something, and he would get paid, and they would go to the local stamp, you know, collecting place, and he would buy these stamps. So he did have quite a collection. I
I
don't think when
remember
they sold it, I don't think it was worth what he thought it was worth or what they spent on it.
it never is.
Yeah.
As a collector myself,
Uh,
I know exactly how it's a slippery slope. Like, oh,
yeah.
I'm just gonna do this thing, but then
Right.
that leads to another thing and then another
Right.
thing.
Right.
I remember the story that you told me over the phone about how he was a vinyl collector in his
Yeah.
day, and
Yeah.
that is such a fantastic story because like
Right.
I believe that also drove your grandmother crazy because they were there for like hours looking at
Yeah.
vinyl.
Yeah. That he had in his home, he had, I guess the equivalent of what used to be a CD changer, but a record
That's
player
right.
that held a huge amount of records. I don't know. I want to say like 16 or 20 or something like that. Anyway, they would go to record shops for entertainment, and they had little booths, and you could preview the records. And he and my grandmother would be in there for hours because he would take a big stack, and he would eventually make the no stack, the yes stack, and then the maybe stack took forever. And so by the time they actually got home with the records, I think she was tired of hearing
I commend his attention to detail because I I also possess that as a collector.
them.
Um, there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to Béla Lugosi's career, whether that's the roles that he took on or his
Uh,
dynamics with other actors. Obviously, probably the biggest one is his relationship with Boris Karloff,
mhm.
because there was that whole feud that like was blown up in the press that wasn't even really a thing. Like
Yeah.
the
I mean,
they
I've had the opportunity to get to know Sarah Karloff very well, and I've heard her, of course, be interviewed along with my dad for my whole life, and neither one of them, remember there being a feud or even anything really, poor words said about each other. Um, they were so different and had such different social lives. And I mean, I guess the thing that connects them is that they were always competing for, the same type of roles. So, you can see that. And because Bela, um, I think whether it was a combination of him standing on principle or just not having good representation as an agent, he just didn't get offered or command the same salaries for roles that Boris did. So, I'm sure that was hard.
Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of competition between probably the same like five actors when it came to
Mm,
Universal films. Like
yeah.
you had Boris Karloff, Bela
Mm,
Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr., Claude Rains,
yeah.
and then I mean there are a couple other ones like Dwight Fry was kind of like the
Yeah.
character actor. You could put him
Yeah.
anywhere and he would be
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't feel like that competition, just from the stuff that I had researched and the stuff I had heard, that competition never seemed to get in the way of their friendship, so to speak. Like they
Mm-hmm.
were always cordial together.
Yeah.
I always heard stories. I think the biographer Bob Kramer said that like Bela and Boris both hated Hollywood parties, but when they
Yeah.
both had to be there, they would just leave, like find a room that was empty, and then they would just talk to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what he related to me too. And I think that, came as a story from my grandmother.
There was also, when it came to his role in Dracula, a lot of people talk about his accent, and that
Mhm.
was the one of the most highlighted aspects of his performance.
Mhm.
And people would say that a big part of the overreaction to his accent and
Mhm.
the pace with which he talked was because he was still learning English at the time.
At
And
what time?
when he made Dracula,
Mm.
um, that he didn't fully speak English and that the only words he knew were his lines or something like that. Like there was a big misconception with
No,
that.
that isn't true for the
That's what I thought.
1931 film. I think maybe the stories get crossed over a little bit because he did have to learn his lines phonetically for the play Red Poppy,
Hmm.
which was his first English speaking play in New York. And but soon after that, he learned, to speak and write English.
Yeah, because Red Poppy was like 1925,
I think so.
26, something like
I have
that.
a lot of dates in my head, but yes, mid 20s before he started making any US films, silent films here.
Right. Long before Dracula,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Especially in Universal terms when they would make several films a year, not like the
Uh,
pace that they do now when it takes 5 years to make one film.
I know when, in doing the book and doing timelines and looking at the filmography, and I start seeing like when a film went into production and when it was released. I'm like, how did they do that? And it's like weeks or a few months at the most. There's not, I mean, sometimes it was released, 6 months later or the next year for whatever, but for the most part, the making of very quick.
They were on it, whatever they were
Yeah.
doing. I
Yeah.
know there's probably like labor unions that prevent that from happening now, but
Right.
um but when you think of all the roles that like potentially could have been his, like he he could have been Dr. Frankenstein. There was a time where he could have been the monster. I I might be wrong about this, but didn't he avidly want a part as the Wolfman when that was coming out, or was that not true?
I have never heard that. I mean, he was cast as Bela the Gypsy in The
Right.
Wolfman, but I have never heard that he wanted the part of the Wolfman that Lon Chaney Jr. played.
Okay.
Um, Yeah, I haven't heard that, but he was sure an appropriate person to play Bela the Gypsy in that film. Yeah.
When you think of all the roles that could have been, is there a
Mhm.
specific role that you would have liked to have seen him in? Because personally, I would have loved to have seen what he could have done as Dr. Frankenstein, but
Well, yeah, actually, that's what I was going to say. I think, in thinking about his career, and you think, of course, we're all looking at it in hindsight, but like I said, he really stood on principle on what he thought was a good role or how he wanted to portray a character. Um, After the success of Dracula, Carl Laemmle was really, promoting Frankenstein and the other films, and
yeah.
and had secured Bela for a role in Frankenstein, and Robert Florey was the wrote it and the script, the original script, and was going to direct it, and he cast Bela as Dr. Frankenstein, and Bela was sent a script with him as Dr. Frankenstein, and he was elated. He told my grandmother that he thought that this role could be even bigger for him, and he could do more with it even than Dracula.
Hmm.
And so it was a surprise to Robert Flory and my grandfather when Universal, the back office, brought in James Whale and a new script, and he directed it, and he cast Bela as the monster. And so I think, everyone tried to talk him into saying, just, give it a try or whatever. And he shot the test footage and did the makeup. And he just said, no, he needed to speak. It wasn't something that he wanted to do. I think my grandmother feels like it was a mistake. And if he had an agent that was really looking out for him, they would have said, listen, Bela, you don't give up your title as, that you've earned here from Dracula and horror movies, and take the role and do the best with it. But he didn't want to. That's why it's tragic, you know, that he created that fantastic role of Igor in Son of
Yeah.
Frankenstein. I mean, he was really funny in that and tragic, and he enjoyed that a lot. And then, as Ghost of Frankenstein, goes on, if people were to follow the succession of the story, they would know at the end of Ghost of Frankenstein that they put Igor's brain into the monster. And so, but when Frankenstein meets the Wolfman came out, Bela took the role as a monster because he had a speaking role. He was Igor. He was
Hmm.
going to be able to portray the monster, with lines, and they didn't say that the operation had blinded him. So, this walking with his hands out in front of him, the
Yep.
famous Frankenstein walk really came from that. And, I'm sure you've seen it. They cut the lines out so you can see his lips still moving, but
Yes.
they took the lines out. But so it just, to me, it's just, I just find that whole sequence of originally being cast as Dr. Frankenstein to ending up playing the monster, and then, having the lines cut, or him not being able to portray it like he thought he was going to. But yeah, so I would have liked to have seen him as Dr. Frankenstein.
There's definitely something poetic about that whole the way everything happened, like you said. And
Yeah.
in hindsight, it kind of this just came to me like a few months ago because I grew up always knowing that Lon Chaney was like Universal's first choice for Dracula. And I
Mhm.
believe that came from his performance in London After Midnight, which is now
Yeah.
lost and nobody's ever gonna see.
Mhm.
Um, but he passed away from a
Yeah.
throat hemorrhage in 1930, so that didn't happen.
Mhm.
But Bela, after Dracula came out, he was another vampire, or maybe a vampire in Mark of the Vampire,
Uh-huh.
which I believe Todd Browning also made that, and it was
Yes.
supposed to be not a remake, but a rehashing of London After Midnight, so
Uh-huh.
to speak.
Yes.
Something about that whole pipeline just seems kind of poetic to me as well because
Yeah.
Cheney was supposed to be Dracula. Now
Right.
Bela's playing Cheney's character. It
Yeah.
was kind of cool.
Right. That's right.
And
Yeah.
as some fun facts about Bela the
Mm-hmm.
man, I know he served in the First World War for Hungary, and
Mm-hmm.
he was also one of the first members of the Screen Actors Guild. Was it the Screen Actors Guild?
Yes, he was
So
number 28.
28.
Mhm.
That's
He was
crazy.
actually in on the ground floor. My grandmother, my grandfather didn't drive, so my grandmother and he were uh, together then, and she would drive him to these secret meetings in people's garages and homes. And so she knows he was there at the first few meetings. And I think he was, when they formed the Screen Actors Guild, I think that he was initially hesitant to put his name as a member because, fresh in his mind was the fact that he had organized a trade union of actors in Hungary and had ended up on the wrong side of the ruling party at that time and had to flee under threat of death because of his role in the union. So I think that you know obviously would put a little bit of a consideration in anyone's mind as to whether to do this again. But he came home from one of the meetings and he told my grandmother, you know, I'm angry at myself. This is so important to me and I should have put my name down right away. And so he did. So he was number 28, but he was probably one of the very, very few first few there.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works out because I believe he left Hungary and came to America because
Uh,
of some political unrest, I believe.
mhm. Yes.
And then he really creates the Screen Actors Guild in America
Yeah.
and advocates for actors' rights and
Right.
filmmakers' rights and stuff like that. And then after his passing, his son does the same thing with the California Celebrity Rights Act.
Mhm.
And I know we had talked about that on the phone. It's come
Mhm.
up in so many interviews that you've done,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that type of connection just can't. It's not lost on me. I don't think.
Right.
I feel like more people should know about that side of things, of how much he cared about the business side and
Yeah.
advocated for better conditions for actors. Because you see now with the SAG strikes that happened a couple
Mhm.
years ago,
Mhm.
and now with AI and the
Yeah.
concept of like uh, people using likeness or through AI and that
Right.
type of stuff, which I personally am very
Mhm.
strongly against.
Uh, I
Um,
go back and forth on that for Bela. In some ways, I always try to put myself in his position. Like, what would he think of that? And
mm,
of course, I'm just guessing. But I think that if he could look back and look down and say, "Oh, my legacy lives on, and my family is getting compensated for it." It's different when you think, okay, people can just do whatever they want. You know,
mhm.
that that is different to me. But as far as maintaining the legacy, I'm on the fence about whether that's something that is appropriate in our situation to do or not. I don't know. It's an ongoing discussion.
It's I feel like it's such a new technology that it's hard to really make concrete decisions on.
Hmm.
I know personally a lot of people don't like it, like the fact that it's like open and public and people can just do
Yeah.
whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
Not to mention and whatever the environmental effects of it are with the data
Hmm.
centers and everything like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like this is probably a really good transition point into Lugosi Enterprises and talking
Mhm.
about the licensing that you
Yeah.
guys have done over the past couple decades because
Yeah.
you've done some really cool products as a
Oh,
fan.
good. Good.
I know Trick or Treat Studios and a couple other companies, they've reproduced the Dracula medallions and the cape and everything. I know
Yeah.
they were very limited editions. I'm still on the hunt for them secondhand myself.
Oh,
Um,
well, I have to say that that license for me in particular for the Cape was m the most important license agreement I've ever done. And I think will always be the most important because I don't know if you know that my dad had the Cape original screen worn Cape in his possession his whole life
mhm.
and then ended up in recent years donating it to the Academy Film Museum here in Los Angeles. It was a very, very hard decision for my family to do that, but it needed to be protected. And, for my dad, having had it with him his whole life, he was thinking of the future, what would happen to it. You can't divide it. You want it protected. You want people to see it. I mean, it was in
Yeah.
our closet in my home. Once in a while, my brothers would try it on, or my dad would try it on. When my youngest brother, was in kindergarten or first grade, he took it for show and tell. And that my mom got a call in the middle of the day from his teacher and said, "Is this the actual cape?" And my mom said yes, and she said, "Could you please come pick it up?" Like, she knew then. But anyway, before the cape got transferred to the museum, to their archive, I made a pattern of it, where I'm not a seamstress, but I said, I need to know the exact dimensions. I want to know where every seam, everything, how the collar stay was put in. It's a heavy duty metal collar stay. I wanted the strings to be accurate, because he tied them under his arms and behind his back,
Hmm.
not like tied like you see costumes doing, but that's how he kept it on his shoulders, was he tied. So anyway, I made it a exact pattern of the cape. And that's the pattern that Trick or Treat used to reproduce that. And we chose as similar of a fabric. It would have been wool back then, but
Wow.
similar of a fabric as we could for both the outer and the inner. And it's a spectacular piece of what you would call licensed merchandise, because if you think about Bela as Dracula, you think about Bela as Dracula in a cape, you
Yeah.
know? And so to me, that's kind of like the hero item. Uh, it was the hero item of our collection. I hope it's the hero item of the museum's collection of horror memorabilia, and so that piece. But anyway, that strayed a little bit from the licensing. Just it was such a important project to me personally. But yeah, I have a lot of fun working with licensees, and most of them that we have worked with in the last 10, 15 years are true fans,
Hmm.
and the artists are fans. The products are always better when whoever's creating them is a fan, and
Absolutely.
because it's so important to them. And also, and in working kind of, I don't want to say side by side with Universal, but anybody that creates a Bela Lugosi as Dracula from the Universal film needs a license from both Universal and from Lugosi Enterprises. um, and all the companies that do these sets of monsters, they're always thrilled that they can also have the likeness, because they don't want all of the monsters and have a generic looking
Yep.
Dracula in that role. So yeah.
That was actually going to be my question. Well, like, I'm so glad you talked about the cape, because my question was going to be like, what was your favorite type of product you guys have licensed? And
Yeah.
that cape, like you said, you really couldn't have gone with a better company too, because
Mhm.
just as a fan, Trick or Treat Studios, they do fantastic work.
Yeah.
I've got this gremlin replica of like one of the ones from the second movie, and it looks like it came from the film set.
Yeah.
Um, but did you, when the cape came from Trick or Treat Studios, did you still have the original cape in your possession, where you like kind of compared it side by side?
So before it, what the process was is that I did the pattern,
Hmm.
and then um, we were at one point auctioned the cape. My dad decided that's what he would do with it. It was going to auction, and it didn't sell. And so at that time, we made kind of a temporary pattern with a, uh, a gentleman in Los Angeles that makes a lot of clothing and suits for studios, and he made a pattern cape.
Mm.
It wasn't exactly right. So what I did is I took when I took that cape, and then I had already had the pattern. I fixed it up, and then that pattern we sent to Trick or Treat, and their company sent back a few samples, and then so the answer was I had the actual exact pattern went
Hmm.
before the cape went to the museum, but I didn't have the cape side by side. It's huge. it's almost a full circle when it's spread out, and so
Wow.
I had to tiptoe around it. I didn't want to, step on it. I had to be very careful.
Now, was that like a one of one type of reproduction, or did they mass produce those?
They made a run of, I think, several thousand, or
Oh,
maybe I thought so. I don't know. I'd have to go back and check. It's been a while. I know they're sold out. So, good
yep.
good luck in your search. If I come across one, I'll let you know.
Please do. I found a couple medallion replica, one from Trick or Treat Studios, and I actually saw one like out in the wild in Wilmington at a Halloween store.
Uh-huh.
But I know that there was another company that had made one, and it was kind of like a display piece.
Yeah, a long time
Um,
ago. We were not, that wasn't a part of a license with us.
oh,
Yeah.
good to know. So
Yeah.
I'll get the Trick or Treat one then.
Yeah. Neither one. That wasn't either.
Whoa, what?
No, just the cape with trick or treat.
Wow. Maybe I'm getting them mixed up then.
No, no, I think because a lot of times when they display, the items for Dracula, they put them in the same section, so there might have been a little confusion on that.
Maybe. I don't know.
But it's a
Um,
nice piece regardless.
yeah, I know they had
Yeah,
you guys had Lugosi wine, you do the coffee. I
yeah.
I don't drink wine or coffee.
Well, all most of what we do, and it's is we try to do really high quality, limited edition things. I mean, there's been a few products recently, like NECA has made a lot of figures, and those were more like you would say mass market.
Hmm.
But for the coffee and the wine and some of the more expensive high end items, we try to do a limited. Even with some of our T-shirt licensees, the designs
Yeah.
are usually limited, and I think I think it that to me that keeps the interest alive with fans, so it's not just the same image year after year. And
Yeah.
what I appreciate so much is different artists' interpretation. It just rather than just putting a straight up image on licensed products, I really like it when we find an artist that will, you know, do the packaging that with their own, you know, interpretation of Bela. As long as it, of course, looks like him and is tastefully done.
Yeah.
I like having all different art.
And I'm sure you've come across several art pieces at conventions. I know I have. And they're all the fact that they're all so different, but also well done and so
Mm-hmm.
unique. That's
Yeah.
one of my favorite things about going to conventions.
Yeah.
And you and your father have done so many over the years. I know Monster Palooza is like the big one that you guys mainly do.
Yeah.
Um, what is it like for you to like meet the fans of your grandfather who like have such a passion for his work that like you as the family do as well?
Yeah. I mean, I don't get to go, and as I've been working on this book as often over the last few years as I would want to, but I have to say that I had no idea when I started doing this with my dad. I mean, those weekends are my favorite memories of doing anything. It's like if you want to like go and just it's like a love fest basically. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
people are so nice and so respectful and so interested. And for me, who's kind of is secluded in my little world here doing this, I absolutely love talking to people and like you and I are talking. I like hearing what their favorite parts were. I like hearing why they still enjoy Bela's movies. And to me, it's just, I mean, that's really the only reason we do this. I mean, if we didn't have fans, there would be nothing. And so it's just it's the best part is getting out and meeting people. I wish I could do it more,
Do you
more
think
across the country. It's just not something that I, at least at this point, can incorporate into my life.
it's probably very hard to travel so much?
Yeah.
Um, do you see yourself doing a couple more appearances once the book is like released to promote it or not really?
I mean, as of now, we will be at Monster Palooza in Los Angeles in the spring.
Hmm.
Whether or not the book will be available to purchase at that time, I don't know. but I miss being out. I miss seeing people. I when we go to these shows, I always keep a little kind of stockpile of the interesting products we've done that you can't find, in stores or online anymore. And so I'd like to kind of have a display, and a lot of people buy things, but mostly we talk about things. We just talk, and I miss that. So I'm looking forward to getting out. And other than that one, I don't have any plans. Maybe Midsummer Scream, which is also
Mm.
here in Long Beach in California. We've attended that in the past, and it's been great. So maybe this year, I'm not sure yet.
One of these days, I'm definitely gonna have to make it out to the West Coast because
Yeah.
Monsterpalooza, that's been like one of the biggest shows in the country
Uh,
for as long as I've been even
yeah.
attending them. But I definitely do want to make a point to make it out there and meet you and the Cheneys and all of the classic royalty families, just
Oh gosh.
because that's like I always say this because a lot of people now are talking about the classic horror like Friday the 13th, Halloween,
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm
Yeah.
Street. I don't have anything against those movies. I
Yeah.
love them. I got Ghostface right behind me.
Yeah.
But to me, when I think of the word classic, it's always going to be the Universal monsters. And
Yeah.
I do everything I can to talk to people about how great those movies are.
Mhm. Well, I always be happy to meet with you, even if there's not a convention, if you get out this way.
Absolutely. I'll have your people call my people. Um, I know towards the end of his life,
Mhm.
Bela had worried that he had kind of been forgotten in the public eye to a certain degree. But when you attend these conventions and see the tattoos and the t-shirts and just
Yeah.
hear people's stories, how reassuring is that to you as like the descendants of his
Yeah.
legacy to hear?
Gosh, I just and of course I'm honored, and I'm just overwhelmed, but it also makes me a little sad that he ended his life. Um, he told my dad nobody knew who he was. He'd been forgotten. It was really, so for us as the family, it's wonderful, but there is a little tinge there of sadness that he didn't know. And I actually just don't think he could have imagined this, you know, just absolutely couldn't have imagined it.
Well, I know your Lugosi Enterprises big project right now is The Man Behind the Cape, the
Yes.
biography. It's a it's like a biography slash coffee table book, if I'm not mistaken. There's like over a
Yes.
thousand different photos.
Yes.
The cool thing to me about it is that you still work with the biographer Robert Kramer, who wrote The Man Behind the Cape, I believe in the
Right.
70s or something
Yeah.
like that.
I think it was actually released in like 1976, but I believe he met my dad in about 1972, 73.
Okay. So compared to the that manuscript, so to
Mhm.
speak,
Uh-huh.
and transitioning it into this project and with all the photos and everything, what
Yeah.
has that process been like for you over the last however many years?
Yeah. Well, we've obviously stayed in touch with the author. He's a family friend,
Right.
over the years. And it just, when I first started, really doing a lot more with the business, and we had stacks of the original book, and I started asking about it, and came to understand, which I didn't know because I was too young at the time, that it just
Hmm.
really wasn't well distributed. There were problems. That was when everyone was doing orders on paper. The
Oh.
books went to a warehouse, orders didn't get fulfilled. So it was very well reviewed, but just not widely released like I think it should have been. And then seeing subsequent biographies, some very good, um, some not good, I thought, you know what? We know so much more now. We have digital information, newspapers, whatever, to confirm like a pattern in a Bela's life. So anyway, I asked if we could at least reissue the book, and that's how it started. And then I realized, you know what? We can do this. This needs to be expanded. So we went through one publisher. It wasn't a great match. And then COVID hit. We had the manuscript. pretty much, and COVID hit. Then so it took a while to find a publisher to who was willing to publish it the way we wanted to, and basically giving us free reign. Clover Press, they've been amazing. But yeah, it's been so wonderful for me because I feel like talking to Bob Kramer and asking him about like a story in the book. I would say, well, why did my grandmother think that? Or why do you think, what else was happening in their life? And he would go on and tell me, and I would say, let's put that in the book. So it grew. But I think it's a really great story. Some tragic things, some happy things, some funny things, but it's the true story, I believe, the definitive story of my grandfather. And being that we were able to now for the first time put documents, letters, photographs from the family albums in the book, it really is very personal.
I think converting it into a coffee table book as well is a great way to go about it, just because for me personally, I feel like those are better
Mm-hmm.
reference tools than just
Mm-hmm.
a book.
Yeah.
For example, one of my favorite musical artists is Alice Cooper, and
Uh-huh.
he's got stacks on stacks on stacks of biographies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they have a coffee table, and with all the different eras of his career, it allows
Uh-huh.
me to just go to a couple different sections if I
Mm-hmm.
want to
Yeah.
think of just a couple things.
Right.
And I think with the Bela book, there's just so much to his life story that
Yeah.
you can really just flip a random page and find
Right.
something absolutely fascinating.
Right. Well, other than we had Gary Rhodes, who has done wonderful biographies on my grandfather, and Bill Kaffenberger, they were kind enough to let us use their extended film and stageography in the book. So that is in the book, but the book really isn't like if you were a film history buff and you wanted to know about the actors and how something was made. That's not what this book is about. It's really about his life. But of course, it's he's an actor, so the
Yeah,
movies are in there in the order that they were released, and tell a little bit of the plot of the movie, Bela's role, any like interesting stories surrounding those films or what was happening in his personal life during that time. So it's a different take on like a film book than most. And I think it lends itself to this oversized, more coffee table size, just because we're able to put such beautiful pictures in the book.
absolutely. And I think, like you said, it focuses more. I mean, the title gives it away. It's the man behind
Yeah,
the cave. So it talks more
yeah.
about his life and his own personal
Hmm.
dealings with those films more so than the production history and stuff like
Yeah,
that. Um, which I think a lot of people would find more interesting just because there's not a lot out there about
yeah,
it. Not there is, but with all the misinformation out there, to
yeah.
have a family authorized
Hmm.
biography, I think
Yeah.
that's one of the most important things.
Well, that's originally why my grandmother, when Bob Kramer originally approached my dad and her, my dad said, you have to meet my mom, and she needs to be okay with this. And so they hit it off. And he was the only biographer
Hmm.
and people were very interested in doing books on him that she felt comfortable with. And she said, I want to tell the whole story, the good and the bad. But I also want to straighten out these rumors that have been perpetuated. And Bela did also exaggerated things and said things. So
Yeah.
she really wanted to set the record straight because especially surrounding the end of his life and his commitment for drug addiction, even Bela himself exaggerated that, and the press took it from there. So she wanted that to be clear, and I think we do a good job of being very honest about that.
And I know it's been in the process of recreating this, it's been a few years of doing it. How, number one, how stressful has it been for you? Like just trying to make sure you have all of the information before it gets released and stuff like are you always just finding new things every single day?
Yeah, I mean, we thought that this manuscript was done. And as we started talking about it to people, or as I would reach out to collectors, somebody would show me a picture and I'd be like, what is that about? And it would open a can of worms, that,
Mm.
and we'd go down these rabbit holes and discover, oh, either we didn't have things in the right order, or we didn't know about this or that, or now we can explain what's happening in this picture. A lot of that information came because my grandmother and grandfather kept these extensive newspaper clippings, photo albums. They're taped in with glue. You cannot get them off these pages. But it's like for a good part of his life. And a lot of times there's these pictures that are out there that nobody knows what they are,
Mm.
but I found the article with the picture and it would say what it was. So we could identify a lot of things and place, photographs in the right year and circumstance. But I I like my grandfather, I'm a perfectionist, and I know that this book is going to be published and somebody's going to come to me with something. We have tried so hard to be accurate, dates, places, names, everything, but new information pops up all the time, photos I'd never seen pop up. And so it definitely, you know, maybe years down the road, we'll do a second edition with, if anything really, really important comes up. But for the most part, it's very, very comprehensive.
Whenever it ends up getting released, I'm very excited to flip through it.
Good.
I'm not particularly in a hurry because I know these things take time.
Yeah.
I've heard musician biographies that who are
Mhm.
still actively creating music and they would write their own biographies. They would talk about how it got delayed, and an interviewer would ask, "Oh, what was the reason for the delay?" And they're like, "I'm writing my life story. Can you just give me a minute?"
Takes a long time. I know. That's the thing. That's the thing is I want, I mean, really, first and foremost, this is a history.
Yeah.
This is a book that I want people to be able to, like you said, go back and say, what was Bela doing at that time, or what was this picture, from a film. Um, but it's, for my family, for the generations coming after Bela, I just want this to be perfect and right for the family too.
I love those publicity stills and the behind the scenes photos. Of course, I look at the ones from Dracula and I think of that cast photo where they're reading
Yeah,
Dracula and they're in the
right.
background,
Oh, yeah,
or the one of Bela on set. He's like leaning on a spotlight, smoking a cigarette as
right.
Dracula.
Yeah,
I'm gonna assume that the book is full of stuff like that. As far as the
yeah.
photos go.
Boy, it was, at over 1,100 pictures. That was so hard to pare down, right?
Oh.
Because like there are some films that have a lot of film stills and they're all great.
Hmm.
So we had to kind of choose what tells the story. If
Mm.
someone's flipping through, what was that movie about? What character did Bela play? Like, you can't put every scene or every film still in. And even some of the behind the scene ones sometimes aren't as clear. There's publicity stills for sure, like that one for Dracula,
Hmm.
which, was a nice thing. Some of the behind the scenes photos didn't make the cut just because they were pretty fuzzy, unclear.
Yeah.
There are some photos that are not 100% perfectly clear, but we put them in because they're rare or there's only one and they're so important to the story. But for the most part, we tried to find the best version originals to make scans of for this book if we didn't have them ourselves. So, and I am so grateful to the many collectors who have become my friends and were so generous in sharing their collection. They've been doing it their whole life. They've amassed this amazing amount of content, and they pretty much opened up their collections to me so I could call them and say, I need a picture for this. Oh, here you go. Here's three choices,
No
So,
problem.
yeah. So, I couldn't have done it without, we have a lot, but we don't have everything. We have a lot of original stuff, and some of the key pieces from my grandfather's collection were somehow taken at the end of his life, either
Mm.
borrowed and not returned or taken without permission. I don't know, but they have. So in addition to using other people's collections, I have purchased a lot of his original things back from
Oh,
auction. So
that's
yeah,
good.
yeah.
And I know you have kind of taken the helm of Lugosi Enterprises
Mhm.
over the last few years, I believe. I also know you're a bit of an introvert and kind of the shy one of the family.
Yeah.
How being the one doing all the interviews and doing a lot of the business dealings now,
Yeah.
what was that transition like for you?
It was a huge learning experience. As far as the interviews and being in front of people, I just had to really try hard and grin and bear it and know that the reason for doing it was so important. And it's much easier to talk with, like, you're very easy to talk to. So thank you.
Thank you.
Um, but it has gotten a little bit easier now that I feel confident about my grandfather's life and his how he was as a person, because I am not a film history buff. I don't know every actor's name in all my grandfather's films or who directed it or so I always learn from other people, facts about movies. But yeah, it was tough to do that. But as far as the business end, you know, mostly people come to us. They want to do products or they want to license something. So we're honored. We try to do our best to accommodate it and make it easy and, a win-win for everybody. So that part has been, nice for me. But the interviews, the acting, no, that's still difficult.
Yeah, I always think of it as a photographer.
Mhm.
I come across a lot of people. They're like, I don't want my picture taken. I'm like, yeah, me neither. That's why I'm always behind the camera.
Right.
Um, but are there any, aside from this book, are there any other upcoming collaborations or licenses that you can tease for fans in the near future?
Let me see if I can tease. I mean, I would like and I to maybe do another graphic novel
Oh,
featuring Bela. That's something that I'm pursuing, that I'm interested in doing. Uh, you know, Down the road, after I have taken a little bit of a break from the biography, I think that there's room for like just a photo book,
mm,
not really a story, but just photos or even posters. I know
mhm.
our friend Ron Borst is a collector. He did do a book called Graven Images. I don't know if you've seen it,
I've heard of it.
of classic movie posters, but I was thinking, that the posters are the artwork is so beautiful. I think that would be a nice book to do. But as far as products, I'm planning on attending another licensing show either this year or next year, and kind of getting back out there and seeking out new licenses.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's going to be very, very cool to see when the time
Um,
comes. I know
um,
for me personally, I have a lot of posters. Like I got the big re-release poster
uh-huh.
here.
Yeah.
I've got a pin or two, but like I was thinking about it earlier this week. I'm like, man, my Lugosi collection is kind
Yeah.
of lacking.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, that's because I'm not doing my job.
that's
I
because
need
I'm
to
not
get
doing my
that.
job.
No, we have some interesting, potential cover art for some vinyls.
Oh,
We have an ongoing license with, Super 7 and NECA and, some of the figures. So, they like to do things in waves too. So hopefully we'll do something, unique in the future with
yeah.
those existing companies.
That's a big thing too, because for me, my problem was a lot of the stuff was sold out before I ever even knew it existed.
Yeah,
I will
yeah,
say this, because you brought up NECA, this figure is
yeah. Isn't it
incredible.
amazing?
And I got the black and white one. I
Mm-hmm.
believe the there's another one with the original poster, the blue
Right.
poster, and that's
Yeah.
in color,
In
I believe.
color. Yes. They were their artists, their creative team. Uh, I was so pleased to work with them. They worked so hard on getting the license and the sculpt right for that figure and every detail of the costume. They did just a really, really great job.
Absolutely. I haven't taken mine out of the box, but I do love looking at it from time to
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
Um, but whenever the book comes out, I will be the first to buy it. Um, I'm
Okay.
very excited for it. I hope we speak more in the future for sure. This was a great
Sure.
conversation. I had a lot of fun with it.
Sure.
Um, is there any closing message to any Lugosi fans watching this that you have for them?
Oh, just thank you. Thank you for your support and your respect of my grandfather. And, I hope to keep doing these interviews and podcasts and get out in the public more and meet people who, I can talk with and share their experience with. So, but I'll just to fans, thank you so much.
Well, you definitely have an open invite here anytime.
Okay.
And thank you so much for taking
Yeah.
the time. I know this has gone on a little bit long, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. It's
Um,
been fun.
and to everybody who watched this, thank you so much for watching. Happy 95 years of Dracula, or Valentine's Day if you celebrate that, I guess.
Yes. Right.
And until the next interview, stay tuned, stay scared, and I'll catch you later.